You woke up this morning and traded another irreplaceable piece of your finite existence for a currency that depreciates before sunset. Whoever separated a fraction of their harvest before paying their masters secured the exact mathematical foundation of absolute freedom. In his 1875 book, Thrift, Samuel Smiles observes a quiet clerk working at a busy London shipping desk. The clerk receives his weekly silver coins. He hides 2 of them inside a heavy leather pouch.
He lives on the remaining coins and starves his present desires to purchase his future autonomy. The clerk understands that money sent to the landlord or the merchant belongs to someone else forever. The coins inside the leather pouch are the only physical manifestation of his retained life energy. You felt this exact drain yesterday when you transferred your salary to cover your credit card balance. You paid everyone except the person doing the labor.
You watched the numbers disappear from your checking account and realized you are a rapid conduit for other people's wealth. The modern economy requires you to spend every dollar you generate to keep the industrial machine running. If you retain a portion of your wages, the machine loses a vital piece of fuel. You sit at your desk and wonder how to build a lasting fortress. Consumption guarantees your permanent captivity.
Stopping that constant flow of capital outward requires a brutal assessment of how your income dictates your lifestyle. Expanding your cost of living destroys the surplus before it ever materializes. In his 1958 book, Parkinson's Law, Cyril Northcote Parkinson watches a British bureaucrat sitting in a Whitehall office. The official receives an increased annual budget to manage a small department. He hires more assistants and orders better furniture to absorb the new cash. The bureaucrat expands his structural needs until the expenses match the new income. The surplus vanishes into upgraded materials and unnecessary human resources. The principle states that human demand inflates to consume the available supply. You participated in this exact pattern when you received your last promotion. You moved to a premium apartment and financed a superior vehicle within 3 months of the salary bump. You locked the golden cuffs around your wrists. You looked at your premium lifestyle last night and realized you are just as broke at a higher income bracket. You increased your baseline of survival to mirror the exact number on your paycheck. The system encourages this expansion because it ensures you can never walk away from the corporate desk. You must now work twice as hard just to maintain the appearance of success. Upgrades erase your leverage. Lowering that baseline creates the first real gap between what you earn and what you owe. The surplus you protect in that gap becomes the raw material for building a hidden empire. In his 1928 book, Capital and Finance in the Age of the Renaissance, Richard Ehrenberg examines a merchant named Jacob Fugger. The merchant sits in a dark counting house in Augsburg, staring at a massive leather ledger. He records a tiny interest payment. Fugger does not spend the small copper coins on fine wine or imported silk. He lends those specific coins out to a second desperate merchant. The original money generates a tiny fraction of new money while Fugger sleeps in his bed. He repeats this process in total silence for decades, until his accumulated capital holds enough gravity to finance the wars of European kings. The invisible multiplication outpaces the limits of human muscle. You stared at the concept of compounding last week when you looked at a retirement calculator online. You entered a small monthly contribution and watched the projected graph curve upward in the distant decades. You closed the browser window because the distant future felt disconnected from your current immediate stress. You assumed wealth required a massive initial inheritance. Time replaces the missing capital.
Harnessing that long horizon requires protecting your growing surplus from the desperate ego of the modern consumer. Displaying the capital before it hardens into an impenetrable fortress invites absolute destruction. In his 1905 book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Max Weber observes a wealthy Dutch merchant walking through a busy port. The merchant owns 3 massive trading vessels returning from the east. He wears a plain black coat woven from cheap wool.
He walks past the lavish mansions of the indebted nobility and returns to a simple wooden house. He refuses to spend his tremendous profits on velvet clothes or gilded carriages. He directs every ounce of his excess capital back into the shipyard to construct a 4th trading vessel. The merchant understands that visible status symbols act as a direct tax on the speed of his compounding wealth. He hides his empire behind an unremarkable exterior.
You felt the absolute opposite of this discipline yesterday when you posted a picture of an expensive dinner online. You wanted people you barely know to witness your participation in the luxury market. You traded a fraction of your future autonomy for a burst of digital validation. You walk into the office hoping your premium watch commands respect from the senior managers. Ego bleeds the hidden treasury.
Eliminating the need for external validation seals the cracks where your capital leaks into the street. Accumulating that quiet surplus transforms your relationship with the people who purchase your time. In his 1960 memoir, The Raven of Zurich, Felix Somari details the actions of an independent Swiss banker before a global crisis. The banker sits in a quiet room, watching foreign governments debase their currencies. He moves his personal capital into liquid, physical assets.
He refuses to tie his survival to the unstable promises of bloated institutions. When the crisis strikes and the surrounding markets collapse, the terrified public begs the state for basic rations. The quiet banker walks through the panic, untouched by the devastation. He deployed his hidden surplus to sever his dependency on the vulnerable system. He holds the power to deny requests and reject unacceptable terms. The surplus buys the ultimate psychological weapon.
You dreamed of this exact power last Monday when a toxic manager handed you a meaningless project. You gripped your coffee mug and imagined handing in a resignation letter without hesitation. You swallowed your pride and accepted the task because you owe a massive payment on the first of the month. You lack the hidden surplus required to say the word no. Dependency kills the human spine.
Refusing to spend the surplus is only the defensive posture of the escape plan. The offensive strategy requires converting those stagnant coins into aggressive soldiers that capture new territory while you sleep. In his 1913 book, Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, Charles Beard examines a colonial landowner reviewing his property deeds in a candlelit study. The landowner holds vast tracts of raw timber in fertile river valleys. He does not swing an axe or push a plow.
He leases the dark soil to desperate farmers who surrender a strict percentage of their annual harvest. The landowner accumulates massive wealth through the physical exhaustion of other men. He owns the mechanism of production
rather than operating the machine himself. He converts his surplus capital into a legal structure that extracts continuous value from the passing seasons. The asset operates without demanding his physical presence. Wealth separates the return from the labor.
You stared at the wrong side of this equation last month when you worked 30 hours of overtime. You received a larger paycheck and felt a brief moment of absolute victory. You traded the best hours of your physical youth for a linear increase in paper currency. You stopped earning the moment you walked out of the heavy glass doors. You lack an asset that prints money in the dark. Labor caps your ultimate potential. Holding the surplus in paper currency leaves your hidden treasury vulnerable to the silent theft of inflation. Protecting the fortress requires migrating the capital into vehicles that absorb the manipulation of the central banks. In his 1931 book, The Epic of America, James Truslow Adams details a pioneer merchant arriving in a frontier settlement. The merchant carries a heavy canvas sack filled with government paper notes. He realizes the local bank is printing notes without restraint. He trades the depreciating paper notes for massive acres of undeveloped land and heavy iron tools. When the frontier economy collapses and the paper notes become worthless kindling, the merchant stands on solid ground. He preserved his exact purchasing power by holding physical things that cannot be diluted by a desperate committee. He recognized that fiat currency is a melting block of ice. He traded the ice for the deep freeze. You ignored this silent melting yesterday when you checked your traditional savings account. You looked at the flat interest rate and felt a false sense of security. You did not calculate the rising cost of basic groceries and raw energy against that stagnant digital number. You are holding the melting ice block while the surrounding temperature rises. You must command your surplus to purchase ownership in the machines that print the inflation. Cash guarantees a slow death.
Directing your capital into productive assets requires a profound separation from the daily panic of the general public. Building the hidden empire demands a psychological isolation from the emotional noise of the crowded street. In his 1841 book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, Charles Mackay observes a wealthy Dutch investor during the peak of the tulip mania. The investor stands near a chaotic market square, watching men trade entire estates for a single flower bulb.
He refuses to participate in the collective hysteria despite the massive short-term profits happening around him. He understands that a massive crowd moving in absolute unison is walking toward a steep cliff. He returns to his quiet study and focuses on his stable shipping contracts. When the fragile tulip market shatters, the screaming participants lose their entire family fortunes. The quiet investor protects his empire through a deliberate act of isolation. You felt the exact pull of the manic crowd last year when your coworkers discussed a speculative digital token. You listened to their stories of massive overnight wealth and felt a desperate fear of missing the opportunity. You opened a trading application and prepared to gamble your hard-earned surplus on a wild rumor. You walked toward the cliff because you craved the approval of the blind herd. Boredom protects the heavy vault. Protecting the vault from the madness of the crowd is meaningless if you allow institutional creditors to hold the keys to your gates. Securing the perimeter of your new empire requires the systematic elimination of every financial obligation that claims a portion of your future energy. In his 1957 book, The New Class,
Milovan Gilas examines a political official reviewing debt records in a working-class district. The official traces the flow of interest payments returning to the state bank.
The official understands that a citizen holding massive debt is a citizen who can never mount an effective rebellion. The debt forces the individual to remain inside the prescribed economic structure to service the monthly interest. The official smiles because the chains are made of paper instead of heavy iron. A man free of debt can survive on a fraction of his normal income. A man holding a mortgage must bow his head and accept the whip. You felt the weight of this invisible whip when you calculated your total outstanding consumer debt last week. You looked at the student loans, the vehicle financing, and the credit card balances staring back at you from the screen. You realized you owe your next 5 years of physical labor to institutions you despise. You cannot take a strategic risk because your future wages are already pledged to a distant bank. Debt buys your future obedience. You wake up tomorrow and trade another piece of your finite existence for a currency that depreciates before sunset. Whoever constructs a strict wall between their income and their ego builds an invisible mechanism that generates unshakable leverage. The clerk at the shipping desk paid himself before he paid the world and starved his present desires to buy his future autonomy. He hid the coins in a leather pouch and secured the foundation of absolute freedom.
The knowledge required to build this quiet leverage was never kept hidden from the public. The ancient mechanics of wealth generation are reserved for the people who possess the discipline to ignore the endless noise of consumption. The group that studies this architecture and builds hidden wealth is expanding right here on this screen. Stay close to the fire. You are on the side that sees.